In the silence of a winter night, 300 soldiers disappeared. No shots fired, no screams heard. The official report said they froze to death. 73 years later, a box was found in the Pentagon, and the truth was far darker. Don't forget to subscribe so more of these classified files can see the light of day. December 2024. Dr. Helen Mackenzie was working in the Pentagon archives in Washington, D.C., researching her grandfather's military records. First Lieutenant James Mackenzie had heroically died in service during the Korean War, according to his files. But what Helen found would expose not her family history, but America's darkest secret. An old radio box. Inside were encrypted recordings and a single photograph. 3 young men smiling in the photo, snow-covered mountains behind them, shaky handwriting in the corner. Last night, God forgive us. When Helen decoded the recording, she noticed her hands were trembling. Her grandfather's voice echoed through broken radio static. "This is Echo Base. Mackenzie here. My brothers, they don't recognize me." November 1951. Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. American forces were experiencing a dramatic retreat against the Chinese army. Temperature, -40 degrees. The freezing wind cut through to the bone. First Lieutenant James Mackenzie was the radio officer for the 2nd Infantry Division. 28 years old, with 2 brothers also fighting in Korea. Mackenzie looked at the photograph in his pocket every night. Tom and Billy, his twin brothers, both fighting in different units but on the same front. When they left home, they had promised their mother, "All 3 of us will return together." But what none of them knew was that their own commanders had already decided they would never see home again. That night, November 23rd, a strange order came through. Mackenzie's unit would be stationed at a temporary base called Echo Base, an old Soviet facility, on the mountainside, away from other units. "Special mission," they were told. "You'll monitor secret radio frequencies." The facility smelled cold and damp. Metal corridors, bare bulbs, Russian letters on the walls. When Mackenzie and 299 soldiers were settled inside, the doors were locked behind them. "For security," the commander had said. The first night passed normally. Mackenzie scanned Chinese frequencies on his radio. He was expecting news from his brother's units, but the radios were silent, as if the entire world had gone quiet. On the second day, strange sounds began. Clicking in the walls, whistling in the ventilation system. Soldiers complained of headaches. Mackenzie noticed his own eyes were watering. There was a strange taste in his mouth. Metallic, bitter. But the real shock came on the 3rd night. While Mackenzie was on night watch, he heard footsteps in the corridor. He approached. Tom was standing there, his twin brother Tom, but his eyes were empty, like glass. Mackenzie approached joyfully. "How did you get here? Where's Billy?" Tom didn't answer. He just looked at him with those empty glass-like eyes. Then he raised the knife in his hand toward Mackenzie. Mackenzie pulled back at the last second. "Tom, I'm your brother, James." But Tom didn't recognize him at all. He lunged at him. Screams rose in the corridor. Soldiers were attacking each other, friends, brothers, people who had fought shoulder to shoulder for years. They recognized none of them, that empty expression in their eyes, like glass, soulless. Mackenzie ran to the radio room. He called for emergency help, but the voice that answered froze him. "Echo Base, this is Dr. Petrov. Experiment proceeding as planned. Memory erasure process successful. Please do not intervene." But there was something else Mackenzie didn't know. That metallic taste in the ventilation system was a chemical. LK7, developed by Soviet scientists, a gas that erased memory, destroyed recognition ability. The American commanders knew this. They even wanted it. Mackenzie found a classified file, titled Operation Blackout. American generals had made a secret agreement with Soviet scientists. Soldiers whose memories had been erased as prisoners of war would be infiltrated into their own armies. Perfect saboteurs, without raising any suspicion. But the experiment had gotten out of control. When the gas dosage was too high, soldiers began seeing not just the enemy, but everyone as an enemy, even their own brothers. With his last strength, Mackenzie turned on the radio. He recorded what he saw, how Tom didn't recognize him. The sounds Billy made while killing his own weapon companion in another corridor. The attack of 300 soldiers on their own units. "I am First Lieutenant James Mackenzie," he said in a trembling voice. Date, November 24th, 1951. What's killing us isn't the freezing cold. What's killing us is our own commanders. God forgive. God forgive us all. The recording cuts off here. When morning came, rescue teams found Echo Base in silence. 300 corpses. No bullet wounds on any of them. They had died only from knives and clubs. They had killed each other. Official report, died from freezing due to extreme cold, experienced delirium due to hypothermia. Dr. Petrov and his team had disappeared. American commanders wrote a report of enemy attack. The Mackenzie brothers received the stamp, heroically died in service. Files were moved to classified archives. Yet this wasn't the most horrifying part. When Helen Mackenzie deepened her research, she found other files. LK7 gas hadn't been used only at Echo Base. Similar experiments had been conducted at different points in Korea, in Vietnam, and even in the Gulf War. Thousands of soldiers. They had become test subjects for their own commanders. Their memories erased, made unable to recognize their families, then reported as missing. Official records said, died heroically in war. In reality, they had been victims of their own armies. Helen listened to her grandfather's last radio recording again. James Mackenzie's final words, Tom, Billy, I love you. Tell our mother, we were brothers. But perhaps the most painful truth was this. When the Mackenzie brothers died that night, Tom and Billy didn't recognize each other. The LK7 gas had erased their 28 years of brotherhood memories. In their final moments, they had become strangers fighting each other. At the end of 2024, Helen Mackenzie released her grandfather's files to the public. The Pentagon refused to make a statement. Old CIA documents are still classified for security reasons. Official statement, the allegations are baseless. But now the truth was in the daylight. That horrific night at Echo Base wasn't just an experiment. It was part of America's systematic betrayal of its own soldiers. Thousands of families had lived with the lie that their sons died heroically in service. In reality, their sons had become laboratory rats for their own commanders. James Mackenzie and his brothers were remembered as heroes for 73 years. The truth was much darker. They weren't heroes, they were victims. Victims of their own armies. Helen now lives with a single question. If Echo Base was real, how many other heroes were actually test subjects for their own commanders? And these experiments, were they still continuing? The Mackenzie brothers' photograph now sits on Helen's desk. 3 young men, smiling. They don't yet know about LK7. They don't yet know they won't recognize each other. Their last photograph, their last smile. But the most chilling revelation came when Helen found another document, a medical report from 1952. It showed that LK7 wasn't just a memory eraser. It was designed to create perfect soldiers, soldiers who would follow any order without question. Soldiers who wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone marked as enemy, even their own families. The report detailed other test sites. Camp 14 in Alaska, where 150 Marines disappeared during a training exercise. Station X in the Nevada desert, where Air Force pilots were found dead in their barracks, apparently having killed each other with their bare hands. The pattern was always the same: memory erasure, fratricidal violence, cover-up. Helen discovered that her grandfather had been trying to expose the truth before his death. In his final transmission, Mackenzie had managed to record the frequencies used to activate the LK7 compound. He had hidden coded messages in routine communications, desperately trying to warn other units. "They're making us forget who we are," Mackenzie's voice whispered through decades-old static. Tom looked at me like I was a stranger. Billy tried to strangle me with his own hands. They've turned us into weapons against ourselves." The most damning evidence was a letter Helen found, written by her grandfather just hours before his death. His handwriting was shaky, desperate. "To whoever finds this, we are not dying from cold. A gas is being pumped through the vents. It makes us forget our names, our families, our humanity. By tomorrow, I won't remember writing this. I won't remember Tom or Billy. But maybe someone will remember us." That letter had been buried in classified files for 7 decades. The official story never mentioned it. The Mackenzie brothers were posthumously awarded Bronze Stars for courage under fire. Their mother received folded flags and the gratitude of a grateful nation. She never knew her sons had been murdered by their own government. Helen's investigation revealed that Operation Blackout had been much larger than anyone imagined. Documents showed at least 12 test sites across Korea, each with similar results. Hundreds of American soldiers had been subjected to memory erasure experiments. Most never returned home. Those who did were different, hollow, disconnected, unable to form lasting relationships. Some veterans' families had noticed the changes. Soldiers who came home but didn't recognize their wives, their children, their own reflections in the mirror. These men were quietly committed to psychiatric facilities, their stories buried in medical files marked classified. The experiments had continued into the 1960s, 1970s, even the 1980s. Each war brought new opportunities for testing. Each generation of soldiers became unwilling subjects in a program designed to create the perfect fighting force, humans stripped of empathy, loyalty, and individual will. Helen contacted other families, other descendants of missing soldiers. What she found was a pattern of lies spanning multiple conflicts. The government had been experimenting on its own troops for decades, always with the same cover story, heroic death in combat. The first family she reached was the Pattersons in Ohio. Their grandfather, Sergeant Robert Patterson, had also died heroically at Chosin, but his widow had kept strange letters he'd sent home, letters that made no sense at the time. But what Helen discovered next would shake her faith in everything she'd believed about American military honor. "Mary, I dreamed I had a brother last night," one letter read, "but when I woke up, I couldn't remember his face. Do I have a brother? Please write back and tell me who I am." Mary Patterson had thought her husband was suffering from combat stress. She never knew he was slowly losing his mind to government experiments. Helen called Mary's daughter, Susan Patterson Clark, now 78 years old. Susan's voice shook as she read her father's final letter aloud over the phone. "Something's wrong with my head, Mary. I look at pictures of us and feel nothing. The other boys say they feel the same way, like we're ghosts of ourselves. If something happens to me, know that I loved you, even if I can't remember what love feels like anymore." The conversation lasted 3 hours. Susan had spent decades wondering why her father had seemed like a stranger in his final letters home. Now she finally had answers that made her sick to her stomach. But what Susan didn't tell Helen during that first call was even more disturbing, and it would change everything Helen thought she knew about the experiments. "My mother died believing Daddy was a hero," Susan whispered. "She never remarried, said no man could compare to her Robert. She loved a ghost, didn't she? A man who'd been erased by his own government." Helen found similar stories across the country. The Kowalski family in Detroit, the Gonzalez family in San Antonio, the Williams family in Atlanta. Each had a grandfather, an uncle, a father who died heroically in Korea. Each family had kept strange final letters, disturbing phone calls, confused telegrams that never made sense. But it wasn't just Korea. Helen's investigation led her to Vietnam War records, Operation Minesweep, conducted between 1967 and 1970. American soldiers in remote camps were exposed to experimental drugs that erased their ability to distinguish between civilians and combatants. The infamous My Lai massacre wasn't an isolated incident of war crimes. It was a failed experiment in chemical mind control. She found testimony from Dr. Margaret Reeves, a military psychiatrist who'd tried to blow the whistle in 1969. "They brought me soldiers who couldn't remember their own names," Dr. Reeves had written in a letter to her senator. Young men who'd been normal, healthy Americans just weeks before. Now they sat in my office like empty shells, staring at photographs of their families and feeling nothing. When I asked what happened to them, I was told it was classified. When I pressed further, I was transferred to Alaska. Dr. Reeves had died in a car accident in 1971. Her medical records were sealed. Her family was told she'd suffered a nervous breakdown from working with traumatized veterans. Another lie, another cover-up. However, the most shocking revelation was still buried in classified files, waiting to destroy everything the American public believed about their military. Helen discovered that the experiments had evolved over time. By the 1980s, they weren't just erasing memories. They were implanting new ones. Operation False Flag created soldiers who believed they were fighting for America while actually carrying out assassinations of American civilians who opposed government policies. The evidence was in a vault in Nevada. Helen drove there herself, using her grandfather's military clearance codes that somehow still worked after 7 decades. What she found in that desert facility made her understand the true scope of the horror, but nothing could have prepared her for what she would discover about her own family's role in this nightmare. Rows of filing cabinets, thousands of names, thousands of test subjects. Each file contained before and after photographs. The before photos showed normal young men, sons, brothers, fathers. The after photos showed empty eyes, vacant stares, faces that seemed to have forgotten how to express human emotion. Helen opened one file at random. Private Danny Morrison, age 19, from Kansas. Farm boy, engaged to his high school sweetheart. His before photo showed him grinning, holding a letter from home. His after photo, taken just 6 weeks later, showed a different person entirely. Same face, but the humanity was gone. Danny's file contained his final evaluation. Subject demonstrates complete memory suppression. No recognition of family photographs. No emotional response to news of fiancé's death. Ready for deployment in counterintelligence operations. However, what Helen found in Danny Morrison's file was nothing compared to the bombshell waiting in her grandfather's complete record. Danny Morrison had been sent back to Kansas in 1983 with a new identity and a new mission. Infiltrate anti-government groups and eliminate their leaders. He'd murdered 6 American citizens before being found dead in a motel room, apparently by suicide. His file noted, asset terminated as planned. Cover story, veteran suicide due to PTSD. Helen found her grandfather's complete file. James Mackenzie hadn't just been a random victim, he'd been specifically selected for the Echo Base experiment because of his radio expertise and his close relationship with his twin brothers. The scientists wanted to see if memory erasure could break even the strongest human bonds. The file contained transcripts of conversations between Dr. Petrov and American General Harrison Webb. The subject Mackenzie shows unusual resistance to the LK7 compound, Dr. Petrov had reported. Even after full memory suppression, he continues to express emotional attachment to the subjects identified as his brothers. Increase the dosage, General Webb had ordered. We need to prove that family bonds can be completely severed. If we can turn brothers against each other, we can turn anyone against anyone. Sir, the increased dosage may prove fatal. Acceptable losses, Doctor. The future of American defense depends on creating soldiers without emotional weakness. Helen found video recordings from Echo Base, grainy black and white footage showing her grandfather and his brothers in their final days. The progression was horrifying to watch. Day 1, the 3 brothers eating together, laughing, sharing stories from home. Day 5, confusion, headaches, difficulty recognizing each other. Day 10, complete strangers sitting at the same table, eyeing each other with suspicion. The final recording showed the massacre. Soldiers attacking each other with primitive weapons, moving like zombies, their faces showing no recognition, no emotion, no mercy. Her grandfather's final moments were captured on film. Tom and Billy converging on him with knives, while James backed against a wall, still trying to reason with them. Yet even this horrific footage paled in comparison to what Helen found next, evidence that the experiments had never stopped. Tom! Billy! It's me! It's James! We promised Mom we'd come home together. But Tom and Billy showed no recognition. To them, James was just another target to eliminate. The camera kept rolling as they killed their own brother, their faces showing no emotion, no recognition of what they'd done. Helen watched her grandfather die over and over again, studying every frame, looking for some sign that his brothers remembered who he was. She found none. The LK7 had worked perfectly. Yet what Helen discovered next in those archives made the Echo Base massacre look like a small-scale test run. But there was one more revelation waiting in that Nevada vault. A document dated just 6 months ago. Operation Neural Network was still active. The technology had advanced beyond chemical compounds. Now they were using electromagnetic frequencies to alter brain function. The test subjects were modern soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iraq. Veterans who came home with PTSD weren't all suffering from combat trauma. Some were suffering from experimental neural modification. The government was still experimenting on its own soldiers, still erasing memories, still creating programmed killers. Helen found a list of current test facilities: Fort Bragg, Camp Pendleton, Naval Station Norfolk. Thousands of American servicemen and women were being subjected to memory manipulation right now, in 2024. Their families thought they were receiving treatment for trauma. In reality, they were being turned into weapons. The final document in her grandfather's file was a letter he'd managed to smuggle out just days before the Echo Base experiment. He'd given it to a Korean civilian, asking him to mail it to America if anything happened. The letter had taken 73 years to reach its destination. But the letter contained more than just his final words. It contained a warning about something far worse than anything Helen had imagined. "Dear Helen," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm probably dead, and you probably don't know me. I'm your grandfather, James Mackenzie. I don't know if you exist yet, or if you ever will, but I'm writing this for someone in my family to find. They're going to do something terrible to us. I don't know exactly what, but I know it involves changing who we are, changing how we think. I've seen the equipment, heard the conversations. They want to turn us into something we're not. I need you to know that whatever happens, Tom, Billy, and I love each other. We love our family. We love America, but not the America that would do this to its own soldiers. If we die here, we die as brothers. Don't let them tell you we were heroes. We were victims. Find the truth, Helen. Tell the world what they did to us. Don't let our deaths be meaningless." But the letter contained more than just his final words. It contained a warning about something far worse than anything Helen had imagined. Helen sat in that Nevada vault for hours, surrounded by evidence of decades of government experimentation on American soldiers. Her grandfather had been right. He and his brothers had died as victims, not heroes. And the killing was still going on. She thought about all the families she'd spoken to, all the widows who'd mourned heroic husbands, all the children who'd grown up believing their fathers died serving their country. The truth was so much worse. Their fathers had died serving as unwilling test subjects for their own government's twisted experiments. Helen made photocopies of everything, thousands of documents, hundreds of photographs, dozens of video recordings. Evidence that would expose 70 years of systematic abuse, murder, and cover-ups. But she also knew what would happen when she tried to release this information. The same thing that had happened to Dr. Reeves. The same thing that had happened to every whistleblower who'd tried to expose government experimentation. She would be discredited, marginalized, or eliminated. Still, she had to try. For her grandfather, for Tom and Billy. For the thousands of other victims whose stories had never been told. What happened next would prove that some secrets are worth killing for. Helen Mackenzie returned to Washington with a plan. She would release everything simultaneously to every major news organization, every foreign government, every human rights organization in the world. She would make it impossible for the government to suppress the truth. But what happened next proved that some secrets are protected by forces more dangerous than she ever imagined. But as she drove back from Nevada, she noticed the same black SUV following her for hundreds of miles. Her cell phone had stopped working. Her credit cards were being declined. Her apartment building's security system had mysteriously malfunctioned, allowing unknown individuals access to her floor. They knew she knew, and they were already moving to stop her. Helen realized she might not live to see justice for her grandfather and his brothers, but she'd made preparations. Copies of all the documents were hidden in safety deposit boxes across the country. Trusted journalists had been given pieces of the story. If something happened to her, the truth would still come out. On her final night, Helen sat in her apartment looking at the photograph of her grandfather and his brothers. 3 young men who'd believed they were serving their country. 3 brothers who'd promised to return home together. 3 victims of the most horrific betrayal in American military history. She thought about all the other photographs in all those files. Thousands of young faces, all destroyed by their own government's insatiable appetite for creating perfect weapons out of human beings. The next morning, Helen Mackenzie was found dead in her apartment. apparently from a heart attack. She was 34 years old with no history of heart problems. The documents she'd gathered were never found. Her research was dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of an unstable woman. But Helen had been smarter than her killers realized. Before her death, she'd uploaded everything to multiple servers around the world. The files were set to release automatically if she failed to enter a daily password. 3 days after her death, the truth about Operation Blackout and dozens of other government programs flooded the internet. The government tried to discredit the information as fake news, as foreign propaganda, as the work of conspiracy theorists. But there was too much evidence, too many documents, too many families coming forward with their own pieces of the puzzle. But the final revelation would be the most terrifying of all, and it's happening right now in 2025. Congressional hearings were demanded, investigations were launched, families of victims filed lawsuits. The cover-up that had lasted for 73 years finally began to crumble. But the most devastating discovery was yet to come, and it would reveal that the program had evolved beyond anything the public could imagine. But the most important revelation was still coming. Among Helen's files was evidence that Operation Blackout had never really ended. It had evolved, adapted, modernized. The soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan weren't just dealing with PTSD. Many were dealing with deliberate memory modification designed to turn them into sleeper agents within American society. The veterans committing mass shootings, the former soldiers involved in domestic terrorism, the ex-military personnel carrying out political assassinations. How many of them were victims of mind control experiments? How many were programmed weapons rather than broken heroes? These stories have been hidden for generations. The Mackenzie brothers were just 3 victims among thousands. Their sacrifice wasn't heroic, it was tragic. They died not for their country, but because of their country's willingness to sacrifice its own children for military advantage. Don't forget to subscribe and share this story with everyone you know, because the only way to honor the memory of James, Tom, and Billy Mackenzie is to ensure that no other family suffers the same betrayal. The only way to stop government experimentation on American soldiers is to expose it to the light of day. Helen Mackenzie died trying to tell this story. Don't let her death be in vain. The Korean War's darkest secret emerged 73 years later. In 1951, 300 American soldiers allegedly froze to death at Chosin Reservoir. The truth was far more horrifying. First Lieutenant James Mackenzie's granddaughter discovered classified radio recordings in Pentagon archives, exposing Operation Blackout, a mind control experiment. Using Soviet chemicals, soldiers' memories were erased, making them unable to recognize their own brothers. The Mackenzie brothers killed each other that night, but they couldn't remember why. For 73 years, these soldiers were honored as heroic martyrs. The real story reveals America's systematic betrayal of its own troops. This investigation uncovers a decades-long program of human experimentation, cover-ups, and families who lived with lies about how their loved ones really died. The truth about Operation Blackout challenges everything we thought we knew about military sacrifice and government accountability.